Boston, Massachusetts, November 12, 2023. The discomfort started before I even reached the door. The valet gave my old Ford Crown Victoria a look that said everything. Too old, too dull, too me. His forced, "Good evening, sir," sounded like a warning than a welcome. I caught my reflection in the glass, grey suit, worn shoes, steady eyes, and wondered how long it would take for someone inside to mistake humility for failure. The maitre d' didn't ask for my name twice. He just glanced at the reservation list, then at me, like trying to confirm how a man like me belonged to the Ellis table. The smell of truffle and expensive wine drifted through the air. Conversations dipped as I passed. Eyes followed, smiles tightened. Across the room, I spotted Daniel already seated with Victoria and her parents. Their table gleamed, crystal, gold, laughter polished to perfection. Victoria leaned in to whisper something. Richard Ellis turned his head, noticed me, and smiled the way people smile at a mistake they can't quite correct. I took a breath, straightened my jacket, and told myself what I'd told students 100 times before. Stay calm. Observe the experiment. But even then I knew this wouldn't be a test of manners, it would be a test of pride. And the worst part was still waiting for me at that table. The first thing I taste is metal, not the fork, my own mouth. I bite down on the inside of my cheek because if I don't, the tremor will show in my voice. The Monarch grill hums like a well-fed hive, crystal chiming, air knifed cold, a low thunder of conversation polished smooth by money. The carpet smells faintly of truffle butter and lemon oil. My shoes, stitched twice over with my own hands, squeak once on the marble. A small, lonely mouse in a ballroom of lions. "There he is," Victoria says, rising half an inch so her diamonds can jump in the light. "Dan, your father made it." She kisses the air beside my cheek and recoils at the texture of my jacket. It is clean, it is pressed, and it is older than her engagement. "Mr. Callahan," Richard says, already seated, already dominant. He wears a watch the size of a kingdom and a smile like a trap. Elaine does not stand. She tips her head the way people do when reading fine print they've already decided to ignore. "I'm on time," I say. "I parked out back." "Valet must have loved that," Victoria murmurs into her napkin, and I can smell her perfume, a white flower with a cold heart. Daniel doesn't meet my eyes. His tie is too tight. His throat works under it like something trapped. We settle. The waiter, Kevin, his name tag says, fingers chapped, gaze alert, pours a pale ribbon of wine into my glass. The bottle is Chateau Margaux 2010, and the table behaves like that should mean more than the wheat that made the bread. The glass is heavier than it looks. I don't drink. "Please," Richard says, his voice softened with expensive manners. "Try it. It's an experience." He swirls his own like a laboratory demonstration. Aromas, legs, vocabulary. "I'll pass," I say. "Of course," Elaine answers, and something sharp clicks behind her teeth. "Public school teachers always had such discipline, frugality." She says the last word as if it smells. Victoria's smile slices. "Dan told us you taught physics. How admirable. It must have been meaningful." "It was work," I say. "Work is meaningful when you mean it." She blinks, a brief static of confusion. The room is rich with knife and plate whispers. Somewhere someone laughs too loudly. I hear ice in a shaker, a brittle hailstorm behind the bar. Richard leans toward me. "I admire simplicity," he says. "I truly do. My father always told me, live within your means. We all need to know our place." Daniel says, a quick warning. "No, no," Richard goes on, palms spread. "I don't mean that unkindly. Mr. Callahan, it must be challenging living on a teacher's pension. Prices these days, even in, where is it you live again? Asheville." I look at my hands on the linen. The line where my wedding ring lived for decades is a pale ghost. Margaret's name passes through me like a cathedral bell. I keep my eyes on my hands. "Asheville," I say. Rose bushes do well there. Elaine tilts her head again. What an idyllic image. Victoria kills a bubble of laughter with her thumb. Speaking of images, Dan, show them the venue photos. She doesn't wait. She holds her phone across the table like a pennant. We're thinking white orchids along the aisle, suspended in glass. It's elegant but not ostentatious. The chandeliers above us throw molten light over the screen. The orchids look like they're holding their breath. And since we're blending families, Victoria continues, lowering the phone with a tidy clap of satisfaction, we thought your father could, I don't know, contribute something that feels authentic to him. Flowers, maybe. She touches the napkin with 2 fingers. Something sweet, something manageable. Manageable, Elaine repeats. Yes, that's lovely. The metal taste deepens. Flowers, I say. Roses are pricey in winter. They bruise if you handle them wrong. Oh, we wouldn't want you to overextend, Richard says, laughing. Elaine and I were actually discussing how we might help, just to smooth things. We'd like to offer a small monthly stipend, nothing dramatic, $800. It would take the edge off. There are words you can say to a man to remind him he is a man. There are words you can say to try to invite him to forget. I watch the napkin edge. The stitching is neat alone where no one sees it. Dan, I say. His fork freezes. The tines shine like a confession. They're trying to help, Dad. Victoria's eyes are not unkind. They are efficient. It's just practical. We're a team. Teams support each other. Teams also listen, I say. Elaine smiles with her lips. We listen very carefully, Mr. Callahan. We listen to what's sensible. What's sensible, Richard says, tapping the table with 1 finger, once, is making sure everyone knows their lane. Daniel is going to be a partner at our firm one day. Appearances matter. Stability matters. It's not personal. I hear the steak knives being sharpened near the kitchen, metal on stone, hiss and sigh. I smell seared meat, butter smoking, rosemary bruising under heat. I breathe in through my nose, and the cold air scalds. It feels personal, I say. Dad, Daniel says again, but softer. Please, don't. Not here. Mr. Callahan, Victoria tries, her smile rearranged. When we suggested you contribute with flowers, it was to include you. You have such a down-to-earth vibe. It would be charming to have that touch. Charming, I say. A little rustic. She takes it as agreement. Exactly. Kevin, the waiter, arrives with our plates. He sets a fillet in front of Richard, scallops before Elaine, a tangle of microgreens and entitlement before Victoria. Daniel gets salmon he won't taste. When Kevin sets my plate, roasted chicken, skin blistered, smell of thyme and lemon, I catch the flick of his eyes to my jacket elbow where I want to shake his hand. Richard lifts his wine. To family, he declares, to support, to doing the right thing. I lift my water. The ice knocks the glass like tiny bones. To the right thing, I say. He grins, encouraged. Elaine's necklace glitters like a small, cold galaxy. And to wisdom, Elaine adds. Experience. Yes, Victoria says, leaning across the table, her arm grazing the rim of my plate so a lemon seed sticks to her skin. She flicks it away as if it bit her. To learning how the world works. Dan says you taught him to be realistic. Daniel's jaw clenches. The word realistic moves through him like a slow shard. Mr. Callahan, Richard says, more serious now, more intimate. He lowers his voice to fatherly. It must be strange, watching your child step into a different sphere. But you raised a good man. We'll look after him. We'll look after you, too. I cut into the chicken. The skin gives with a crackle. The meat is tender, the plate warm. You'll look after me, I repeat. It's the least we can do, Elaine says, and I hear the clink of her bracelet as if it closed around my wrist. 800, Richard says again, as if saying the number makes it generosity, not measurement. We could transfer it on the 1st of every month, quietly. It won't bruise any pride. Victoria's set smile holds. And the flowers, if you could manage that, it would mean a lot. It would balance the families, a gesture, something visible. The forks, the laughter, the music, all of it suddenly backs up behind my eardrums. Silence, like snowfall. It is the same quiet as when you drop a physics book in a classroom and 30 heads swivel. It is the same quiet as the inside of a church at night. It is the same quiet as a man standing alone in his kitchen with 2 cups and 1 toothbrush. I put my knife down. The blade ticks on the china. I look at my son. He finally looks at me. "Dan," I say, and his name is a bridge. He starts to speak. He stops. "Tell them," I say. "Tell them what's true." His tongue wets his lip. "Dad, please don't make this—" "What?" I say. "Visible?" Richard exhales through his nose, indulgent. "This is becoming dramatic. Truly, there's no need." "There is a need," I answer, and the old calm floods me, the one that comes right before lightning filters through hospital blinds, before a student asks if your wife will ever come home again. There is always a need for the right thing, even when no one has the appetite. Elaine's smile becomes a line. This isn't about right or wrong. It's about appropriate. Victoria's napkin is folded into a swan that can't fly. "Let's not ruin dinner." "Too late," Daniel whispers, and it is the first honest thing at the table. I push my chair back. The legs whisper against the floor. Conversations wobble around us and then pretend to continue. Kevin turns his head and then away. I stand, and the air is colder up here, thinner. The chandelier hums. I feel the weight of every year in my spine. 68 years is a long time to learn how to bend without breaking. I have bent for grief. I have bent for hunger. I have bent for love. But bending for contempt is a different shape. It asks you to fold your name into a neat triangle and slide it under someone else's plate. "No," I say, and the word is soft. It is the softest stone in the world. "No to the stipend, no to the flowers, no to lanes." Richard's mouth opens. "You're being ungrateful." "Ungrateful," I repeat, as if testing a lemon seed between my fingers. "You're offering charity to a man you haven't learned to see. And you're asking my son to be small so your table feels bigger," Daniel says again. But now his voice carries something else. Smoke, maybe, from a fire that doesn't know if it wants to live or die. "The world is watching," I say, because in places like this, it always is. It watches who laughs when the wine is poured and who drinks water because his hands shake. It watches who says family and means dominance. It watches the small economies of humiliation. Elaine leans back, offended by my grammar of the room. "This is wildly inappropriate." "I agree," I say. "This is." Silence grabs the table's edges and tightens. I can hear a spoon resting on porcelain somewhere far away. I can smell my own tiredness, soap and starch and the lemon I rubbed over my hands to hide the smell of engine oil from the drive. Victoria's voice comes out thin, like a string pulled too hard. "Dan, if he's going to make a scene, scenes make themselves," I say. "We're just caught in the light when they happen." Kevin appears at my shoulder, quiet as a good intention. "Sir," he says, not Mr. Callahan, "sir. Would you like me to—" "No," I tell him. "Thank you. I can see myself out." I rest my fingertips on the table and look at my son one more time. "Daniel," I say, "stand where it's right to stand." He swallows. He doesn't move. I take my coat from the back of the chair. The lining sighs. In the reflection of the window, I am a man in a grey suit with threadbare elbows and old hands and a back that refuses to curl. A man whose ring finger remembers. A man who will not leave a tip of his dignity on the table so the meal tastes better. Richard's voice follows me, syrup poured cold. "We tried to help." I turn my head just enough. "You tried to weigh me," I say. "Find me light." I walk. The carpet returns my steps without judgment. The smells thin to winter as the lobby draws me, glass doors opening like a slow breath. Outside, Boston is a bowl of blue steel and exhaust. The valet looks at my keys with the same expression I wore when a student tried to hand me the answer sheet to a question I hadn't asked. He points to the place where my old Ford waits like a stubborn idea. The paint is the color of tired bone. I run my thumb over a scratch near the handle. It's cold. It's honest. Before I open the door, I feel it. The heat of anger rolling up my ribs, the old disciplined wave of it. It breaks against the shore I built to protect what's left of me. I don't drown. I stand in the foam and listen to the city breathe. And then I say out loud to no one, to the night, to the ghosts of roses that bloom in another state, not tonight. I get in. The engine coughs awake, coughs again, settles. I rest my forehead against the wheel, the leather cool, the shape familiar as prayer. I count my breath to 4. I look back at the bright windows, where silhouettes tilt and gesture above plates that shine. I see my son's shape, contained by a frame that's not his. I start to speak his name, and end up saying mine, because sometimes that's all a man can keep. The radio crackles. Somewhere a violin climbs a staircase it built from its own sound. I pull into the stream of cars, into the pulse and sorrow of Boston, and the night folds around me like a coat that knows how to work. If this moment sits heavy on your chest the way it does on mine, stay with me and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country. I'm not done speaking, and I don't think you're done listening. Mornings in Asheville start with light that doesn't argue. It slides over the hills, quiet and deliberate, filling the gaps between the pines before it reaches my porch. I sit there every day at 6:30 sharp, the same mug, the same chair, the same rose bushes that Margaret planted with her bare hands. Some mornings I still half expect to hear her humming from the kitchen window, her rhythm in sync with the songbirds. But the house is quiet now. Too quiet sometimes, the kind of silence that keeps memories alive just to make sure you remember what you lost. 9 years without her, and I still pour 2 cups of coffee out of habit. One black, one with a splash of cream. I drink both eventually, but I never drink the first until the steam fades. It's a small way of pretending she's still late coming down the hall. My name is Thomas Edward Callahan. Tom to friends, Dad to one man who seems to have forgotten what that word means lately. I'm 68, a retired physics teacher. At least that's the story I let Daniel believe. To him, I'm just the old man who stayed behind in this wooden house with the peeling blue porch, living off a public pension and memories. The truth sits deeper. After I left teaching, I didn't stop working. I started consulting, quietly, deliberately, for Atlas Energy Corporation. Not in the public eye, not on the flashy panels or the magazines. I was never made for lights. My role was structural, designing sustainability models, strategic transitions, advising corporate ethics boards that only listened when profit and conscience briefly met. It paid $36,000 a month, an absurd number that I never spoke out loud to anyone, not even Daniel. People might ask, why hide that? Why pretend? Because I wanted him to learn the same lesson I learned too late, that money reveals nothing except the speed of people's masks. I thought if he struggled a little, he'd build something honest. I never wanted him to inherit my comfort, only my backbone. He grew up bright, restless, too eager to arrive, always chasing the next achievement like it would explain the one before. Margaret used to laugh and say, "He's got your eyes, but my hunger." Maybe that's why losing her hit him differently. He built walls of ambition to keep the ache away, and every brick he added pushed me further outside. When he called me weeks ago, his voice had a polished edge. "Dad, I want you to meet someone. Her name's Victoria." The pause that followed was half expectation, half warning. I could tell from his tone that she came from the kind of world that prefers silver forks to wooden spoons. "She wants you to have dinner with her family," he said, and before I could answer, "It's important, Dad, really important." I looked around my kitchen then, the uneven table, the faded curtains, the small calendar still showing Margaret's birthday in blue pen, and I felt something tug deep in my ribs. Not pride, not fear, something older. I agreed to go, but not as the man he thought I was. Not as the invisible piece in his performance of success. I'd go as myself, but I'd wear the mask of simplicity that people like the Ellises would recognize. I wanted to see who they really were when the world wasn't watching. That night, I pulled an old grey suit from the closet. Margaret had sewn the cuffs years ago after our anniversary dinner downtown. She said, "It makes you look like the kind of man who fixes things instead of throwing them away." She was right. The fabric is thin now, but the stitches have memory. In the days before the dinner, I tried to remember the first time Daniel's voice carried embarrassment instead of pride when he said, "My dad." It might have been when Victoria came to Asheville the first time. She stepped into my house like someone touring a museum she didn't want to fund. Her perfume clashed with the scent of pine and coffee. She made polite noises at the photos on the wall, wedding, school ceremony, Margaret's smile framed in sunlight. But her eyes wandered like she was looking for something more expensive to rest on. When I served her chili, she thanked me sweetly, then asked if I had a different kind of spoon. Later she wiped her hands with a disinfectant wipe and whispered to Daniel, not quietly enough, "It smells like old wood in here." I saw Daniel's cheeks tighten, that nervous laugh he inherited from me. "It's just the house," he said. "It's vintage." I pretended not to hear, but inside a small crack formed. Pride is quiet when it breaks. It doesn't scream. It just shifts, and everything sounds different afterward. The following morning, I went to the garden and trimmed the roses. The soil was wet and forgiving. I whispered to Margaret's photo on the porch, "They don't see what's real anymore." She didn't answer, of course. She never does. But the roses looked taller the next day, as if to say, "Keep going." Daniel called again, reminding me of the dinner, his voice lighter now, trying too hard. "Dad, don't stress about what to wear. It's just family." That word again. Family. It sounded thinner than it used to. The morning of the dinner, I shined my old shoes and repaired a loose seam on the left one. There's something sacred about tending to the things the world would rather throw away. My car, an old Ford Crown Victoria with faded paint, started on the first try. It was proud to prove it could still move. The drive to Boston took nearly 4 hours, but I enjoyed the silence. The hum of the tires on the highway was almost meditative. I thought about Margaret's voice saying, "Test them, Tom. You'll learn more by pretending to be less." I arrived early, parked behind the restaurant, and watched the valet laugh with another driver in a tuxedo. I stayed in the car for a while, studying my own reflection in the rearview mirror. Wrinkles deep enough to store stories, eyes too tired for pretense. I practiced my smile, the kind that doesn't invite conversation, just survival. And as the clock ticked closer to 7, I told myself, be kind, even when they're cruel. That's the truest test of strength. But strength is strange. It's easy to carry when nobody tries to take it from you. That night, I'd learned just how fragile mine had become. I didn't sleep much after that dinner. The sound of their laughter still echoed in my ears long after I'd left the restaurant behind. The words weren't just words anymore. They were weights, heavy enough to sit on my chest and keep me awake. That night, I sat on my porch again, watching the rain trace lines down the glass. Each drop caught a reflection of the porch light before sliding away, like dignity draining from a man who's learned to swallow too many insults. Daniel didn't call. Not that night, not the next day. I didn't expect him to. He needed time to decide whether to apologize or pretend it never happened, and I needed time to let the anger cool into something I could hold without burning myself. When you reach my age, anger becomes dangerous. It can choke you faster than regret. So instead I focused on routine. I made coffee, I walked the path behind the house, I read an old physics journal just to remind myself that logic still existed somewhere in the world. But the silence between me and my son stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Every day that passed, it hummed louder. On the fourth night, I finally got a message from him. "Dad, can we talk? Victoria feels bad. Let's clear the air." Those were his words. Clear the air. Not apologize, not understand, just smooth over the mess. Pretend the cracks were never there. I agreed, mostly because I wanted to see whether he'd learned anything from the dinner. I still believed he could. Maybe that was my biggest mistake. He came on Saturday, driving a rented BMW that still smelled of the dealership. He looked different, too polished, too tense. His shoes were new, his eyes weren't. He stepped out, looked around the yard as if checking for witnesses, and said, "You've got to admit, Dad, that dinner could have gone better." I leaned on the porch railing. "Could have gone better," I repeated. "That's one way to describe it." He sighed, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "They didn't mean it that way. You know how people are in Boston, status matters. They just didn't understand." "Didn't understand what?" I asked. "That respect isn't something you reserve for people who can repay it?" "Dad, please," he said, rubbing his temples. "You're taking it personally." "Of course I am. It was personal." His shoulders slumped. "You embarrassed me." The words hung there between us. They didn't fall. They floated, like ash after a fire that never quite went out. "Did I?" I asked softly. "Or did I just remind them that decency doesn't come with a credit limit?" He frowned, his mouth tight. "You can't keep doing this, Dad, acting like the world owes you moral clarity. Things are different now. Appearances matter. They matter more than truth." He hesitated. "They matter in different ways." I studied him then. The suit that didn't fit quite right, the watch he couldn't afford, the worry lines that looked older than they should have. He was my son, and he looked like a man who'd traded peace for presentation. Margaret would have wept. "Victoria thinks we should keep some distance," he said finally. "Just for a while, until things settle." "Distance," I said, nodding slowly. "From your father?" "It's not like that," he said too fast. Her parents, people talk, Dad. The Ellises are very connected. They think your behavior was odd. You didn't have to get defensive. You could have just played along." "And lie," I said. "Pretend I'm grateful for their pity." "Sometimes it's easier," he said. "You could have avoided all this." I looked past him to the road where his car waited, its paint gleaming, its purpose temporary. "Easier isn't the same as better, Daniel." He didn't answer. He looked down at the porch floor, at the worn planks his mother used to polish every spring. He didn't remember that she loved the smell of the wood after rain. He didn't remember much, I think. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "You make it hard to defend you." That sentence hurt more than all the laughter at that restaurant. "Then don't," I said quietly. "Defend what's right, not who's comfortable." He didn't reply. He just nodded, like someone pretending to understand a language they never learned. Then he got in his car and left. The gravel scattered behind his tires like applause from a cruel audience. For days after, I told myself that was the end of it, that some distance might be healthy. But when you love your child, distance doesn't heal, it just hides the infection. And soon enough, it started to show. It began with whispers around town, neighbors asking if I was really who I said I was. One man at the hardware store joked about the professor who thought he was a millionaire. I laughed it off until I saw the article. The headline read, "Fake energy consultant caught pretending to be industry insider." Underneath was a grainy photo of me washing my car in the driveway, wearing the same grey jacket I'd worn to dinner. The article called me a fraud, a liar, and a pitiful old man chasing relevance. It quoted anonymous sources saying I invented my work history to impress people. I knew immediately where it came from. Ellis Holdings had reach, too much of it, and Victoria Ellis, for all her polished politeness, had a vindictive streak sharper than glass. They wanted to erase the embarrassment of that dinner, and the easiest way was to bury me beneath a lie. But what I didn't expect was Daniel's silence. He didn't defend me, not publicly, not privately. When reporters tried to reach him, he gave no comment, and in that silence he chose a side. That week was long, longer than any before it. I stopped checking the mail because every envelope felt like a reminder that I'd lost more than my name. I'd lost my son's belief in it. Nights became heavy again. I'd sit in the dark, listening to the creak of the old house, wondering how a man could teach ethics and still end up the villain in his own story. I thought of Margaret and how she used to say, "People reveal themselves in small humiliations." She was right. The world doesn't need grand betrayals to break you, just a slow series of disappointments wrapped in politeness. Then one morning, as I was pruning the roses, Julian Moore showed up, one of Daniel's old college friends. He'd been an intern at Atlas years ago, now an engineer in his own right. He handed me a folder. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "you need to see this." Inside were screenshots, payment records, and internal memos. Proof that the article wasn't random gossip. It was ordered, paid for, funded directly by Ellis Holdings. For a moment, I didn't speak. The birds had stopped singing. The morning breeze had gone still. I looked at Julian and said, "Why bring this to me?" He shrugged. "Because Daniel deserves to know the truth. And because Margaret once helped me with my scholarship when I couldn't afford textbooks. I never forgot that." Sometimes redemption doesn't come with an apology. It arrives wearing someone else's conscience. I looked toward the mountains where the fog was rising. Somewhere behind that mist was a line I hadn't crossed yet, a line between silence and action. And for the first time in years, I felt something awake inside me. Something sharp, something patient. The Ellises wanted a war fought in whispers. I'd answer with daylight. Julian's visit didn't end with that folder. He stayed for coffee, sitting where Daniel used to sit, at the small kitchen table by the window. The light hit the steam between us, making it look like something holy. He watched me read through the files in silence, bank transfers, private emails, instructions from Victoria Ellis to a journalist named Morton Hale. Every word was a blade disguised as civility. When I finished, I closed the folder carefully. It might bleed if handled wrong. "So," Julian said, "what do you want to do?" I looked out at the garden. The roses were blooming late this year, small, defiant bursts of red. "What would you do," I asked, "if someone tried to erase your name?" He smiled, not kindly. I'd remind them who wrote it first. That afternoon, I walked through town with the folder under my arm. People glanced, whispered. I could hear it, the rumors clinging to me like humidity. At the grocery store, Mrs. Dunning hesitated before greeting me. At the post office, an old student of mine avoided eye contact. Funny thing, reputation weighs more when people believe it's missing. I thought of calling Daniel. Then I remembered his last words. "You make it hard to defend you." Maybe he was right. Maybe decency isn't fashionable anymore. But truth doesn't need fashion. It just needs time. That night I stayed up reading every line again. Between the lines, I found something bigger than my humiliation. Ellis Holdings was hiding illegal government contracts and manipulating environmental data for profit. Fraud. The kind that could ruin more than a few reputations. I called Julian the next morning. "We're not just clearing my name," I said. "We're burning theirs." Over the next weeks, we built a small team. Quiet people, honest ones. A programmer from Atlas, a journalist tired of being silenced, a sound technician who owed me a favor from years back. They met in my living room, where Margaret's photo watched us from the mantel. I told them everything, the dinner, the insults, the smear campaign. When I finished, Julian said, "Then we give them a stage. Let them choke on their own spotlight." We decided to strike during Ellis Holdings' biggest event of the year, the government partnership ceremony, broadcast live from Boston. They'd unveil their green energy initiative, all lies wrapped in PR gold. I would go disguised as a technician, replace their presentation file with ours, one that showed every document, every payment, every crime. Truth as spectacle. The week before the event, I drove to Boston quietly, checked into a modest motel near the venue. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, like it always does before something ends. I thought of Margaret again, of her saying, "The truth doesn't shout, Tom. It waits for silence." I realized the world had finally gone quiet enough to hear it. The morning of the ceremony, I dressed in a black crew shirt and cargo pants. No one looks twice at a man who carries cables. Inside the conference hall, the noise was orchestral. Cameras, chatter, shoes on marble. The Ellises arrived in perfect formation. Richard's handshake rehearsed, Elaine's smile like lacquer, Victoria's dress the color of vanity. Daniel followed behind, pale, unsure, looking like a man still trying to fit inside someone else's dream. When our eyes met, I almost faltered. Almost. But then she laughed, Victoria, her voice echoing through the glass lobby like cut crystal, and I remembered the dinner, the words, the $800. I looked away. Julian's voice buzzed in my earpiece. "You're clear, Tom. Files loaded. 10 minutes until the show." I moved backstage, blending in with the other tech staff. On the main screen, the Ellis logo shimmered, a fake sunrise over a fake planet. People clapped for the illusion. The irony tasted sweet. Then, as Richard Ellis began his speech, "At Ellis Holdings, integrity is the foundation of progress." I pressed the button. The screen flickered once, then twice. The logo vanished. And there it was. Every document, every forged report, every email signed with Ellis Holdings' name. The room froze. The crowd's collective breath became one long intake of disbelief. Reporters leaned forward. Phones rose like flowers to the sun. Victoria turned pale first. Then Richard's voice broke mid-word. Elaine stood, whispering something sharp. Daniel, God bless him, just stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open, as the image of his fiancée's signature glowed 20 feet high behind her. Security scrambled, the lights wavered, and through the noise I walked calmly toward the exit. No one stopped me, no one even noticed. They were too busy watching the mighty fall. Outside, the air was cold and alive. Sirens started somewhere in the distance, maybe police, maybe panic. I sat in my car and let the silence return. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, I just breathed. Justice, when it comes, doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like balance restored. Hours later, I got a text from Daniel. "Dad, I saw what you did. We need to talk." I looked at the screen for a long time before typing back. "Now you've seen what dignity looks like." Then I set the phone face down and started the car. The days after the exposure were quieter than I expected. The world didn't explode, it unraveled, one headline after another, one interview after the next. Ellis Holdings was everywhere. On TV screens, in newspapers, in every corner of the internet. Green giants or greedy ghosts. Environmental fraud rocks financial empire. Atlas consultant tied to Revelation. That last one carried my name. I didn't watch the interviews. I didn't need to. People I'd never met were dissecting my life, speculating about my motives, debating whether I was a hero or a bitter old man seeking revenge. Maybe I was both. But the truth wasn't for them. It was for me, for Margaret, for the years I'd spent biting my tongue. Daniel called 2 days later. His voice sounded thin, as if the world around him had lost its shape. "Dad," he said, "they're finished. The FBI's already involved. They froze Ellis Holdings' assets this morning." I said nothing. Silence sometimes carries more weight than triumph. He went on, "Victoria's family is under investigation. She left the city. I don't even know where. She'll land where people like her always do, I said. Someplace with mirrors and excuses. He didn't laugh. They're blaming me, Dad. The press. My company fired me this morning. Why? They said I should have known, he whispered, that I was part of it by association. That's what happens when you stand too close to a fire and pretend it's warmth. He breathed in, shaky. I don't know what to do. For the first time in months, I heard something real in his voice, not ambition, not pride. Fear. He was stripped bare of the illusions that had kept him safe. Come home, I said. There was a long pause. Not yet. I have to fix this first. He hung up before I could answer. The following week I received an official letter from Atlas Energy's board of directors. They thanked me for moral integrity under duress and offered legal support. Lawyers from the company reached out, eager to help with the defamation case against the Ellises. I declined at first. Then I remembered every whispered insult, every look of pity, every article calling me a fraud, and I accepted. The hearings lasted months. I sat in a courtroom that smelled faintly of dust and ambition, watching the Ellis family's empire crumble piece by piece. Their lawyers sweated through rehearsed lines, their eyes darting toward the jury, as if searching for mercy. There was none. When the verdict came, the judge's voice carried a strange calm. Thomas Edward Callahan is hereby awarded $2.5 million in damages for defamation and reputational harm. $2.5 million. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. Mr. Callahan, do you have any comment? How does it feel to defeat Ellis Holdings? What will you do with the money? I looked at them, these strangers chasing sound bites, and said only, you can't defeat corruption. You can only stop feeding it. That night, I drove back to Asheville. The road was long, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. The headlights painted silver lines across the pavement, like paths toward peace. When I reached home, the roses were still alive, stubborn against the late autumn chill. I sat on the porch again, same chair, same mug. The air smelled like pine and endings. Then headlights flashed across the yard. Daniel's car. He stepped out slowly, no suit, no mask. Just a man, older than he used to be. He walked up the steps and stopped in front of me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "You were right." I shook my head. "No, son, I was just patient." He laughed once, a sound between guilt and relief. "I lost everything. You lost what wasn't yours to keep." He looked around the porch, at the roses, at the chipped railing. "I forgot how peaceful this place is. That's because peace doesn't announce itself. You have to earn the silence." We sat together as the wind shifted. I poured 2 cups of coffee, out of habit. He noticed. "Mom?" he asked. I nodded. "Still makes her cup every morning." He smiled sadly. "I miss her." "So do I. Every day." The quiet between us wasn't heavy this time. It was soft, like something returning home after a long journey. He finally said, "What are you going to do now? With the settlement?" I looked at the roses, something your mother would have been proud of. Months later, we launched the Callahan Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping older professionals and veterans restart their careers. Daniel handled the logistics. I focused on mentorship. We worked side by side, not as father and son divided by pride, but as men finally speaking the same language. People started calling me again, not journalists, not opportunists, but former students, old friends, strangers who'd seen the story online. They thanked me for reminding them that dignity wasn't obsolete. I never knew how to respond, so I just said, "Keep your word clean. It's the only thing that doesn't depreciate." Every morning now, I water the roses. I talk to Margaret about the foundation, about Daniel, about how the world keeps spinning no matter how often we fall. The sun hits the porch, soft and golden, and I swear I can feel her smile in it. The past hasn't vanished. It never does. But it's lighter now. It hums quietly in the background, like an old song you finally learned to stop fearing. Some evenings, Daniel sits beside me, just like before. We don't talk much. We don't need to. The silence between us is full again, of forgiveness, of understanding, of everything we almost lost but managed to save. And when the wind moves through the garden, the roses lean toward the light. They always do. The first spring after everything fell apart came early. The snow melted before March was done, and the soil drank greedily, as if even the ground wanted to start over. I spent those days outside, building new trellises for the roses, repainting the porch rail that Daniel had promised to fix years ago. The work was slow, quiet, honest. I've always believed that healing should sound like wood being sanded smooth. The world kept trying to remind me who I'd become. Magazines sent letters asking for interviews. A television network wanted to film a documentary about the humble man who brought down giants. I threw most of it away. The story wasn't about victory, it was about memory. I didn't want my face on a screen. I wanted my wife's garden to bloom again. Daniel was here most days now. At first he came out of guilt. Then, I think, he stayed out of gratitude. He'd been working with the foundation, meeting people, older veterans, widows, factory workers, teaching them how to adapt, how to find work again. One afternoon, I saw him sitting on the porch with a man named Luis, a retired mechanic with arthritis. They laughed together like equals. It reminded me of the way Daniel used to laugh when he was 12, sitting in my classroom while I explained how magnets worked. Curious, humble, unguarded. That night over dinner he said, "Dad, I didn't realize how many people are forgotten. They get pushed aside the moment they slow down." I nodded. The world loves efficiency more than wisdom. It forgets that slow hands build things that last. He stared at his plate for a while before saying, "I used to be like them, the Ellises. I thought dignity was something you could rent if you looked rich enough." "You learned," I said, "and that's all a man can ask of himself, to learn before it's too late." He smiled, small but real. "I think Mom would have liked what we're doing. She would have said it's about time." The next morning, a letter arrived from Boston. It was from Julian. Inside was a photo from the trial, me walking out of the courthouse, my head slightly bowed, the crowd behind me blurred. On the back, he'd written, "Some battles are fought to win. Others are fought to teach people how to stand." I kept that photo on my desk. Sometimes I drive through the old downtown streets where people once whispered about the fraud professor. They nod at me now. Some even wave. Funny how people remember kindness once it becomes fashionable again. But I don't resent them. The truth has a strange mercy. It doesn't demand apologies. It just waits for the lies to wear out. One afternoon, I found Daniel standing by the rose bushes, holding one of the flowers he used to hold a fragile idea. He said, "I've been thinking about starting classes here. Workshops for seniors, computers, business basics, anything that helps them feel useful again." I smiled. "That's a good thought. Just don't call it charity." "I won't," he said. "I'll call it opportunity." There it was again. That spark, not the old ambition, but something gentler, the kind that doesn't need applause. That night, he asked me, "Do you ever miss the life you had before? The secrets, the work, the paycheck?" I thought for a long time before answering. Sometimes I miss the noise, the sense of importance, but then I remember. None of it meant much when I couldn't share dinner without shame. He nodded. "I get that now." We sat on the porch until the stars came out. The night smelled like rain and soil. Crickets stitched the silence together. I could feel Margaret somewhere in it, quiet and proud. "Dad," Daniel said suddenly, "I'm sorry. For everything." I turned toward him. His face was different now, lined not by arrogance but by honesty. "I know," I said. "You don't have to keep saying it." "I'll say it anyway," he whispered, "because I need to." I reached over and placed my hand on his shoulder. It felt steady there, like it had always belonged. "Then we start again," I said. He looked out at the garden. "Start again," he repeated. The next morning, he built a small wooden sign and nailed it into the ground by the path that led to the foundation office. The words burned into it read, "Callahan Foundation, for those who refuse to be forgotten." Every time I walk past it, I think about how much can change when you stop trying to prove your worth and start living it. People like to talk about closure, but I don't think it exists. The past doesn't close. It folds neatly into who we become. The pain doesn't vanish. It turns into soil. And if you're lucky, something beautiful grows there. When I sit on my porch now, the wind carries laughter again. Daniel's, the volunteers, even mine. The roses are thicker, stronger, like they've been waiting all this time to bloom for real. I run my hand along the railing and feel the wood hum beneath my fingers, alive with the sound of forgiveness. And sometimes, when the sun dips low and the porch light flickers on, I swear I can hear Margaret's voice, soft as the breeze, saying, "You did it, Tom. You finally remembered what matters." Maybe she's right. Maybe I just needed to lose everything to realize I already had enough. The foundation grew faster than either of us expected. Within 6 months, we had over 100 members, retired teachers, mechanics, nurses, veterans, and people who had been told they were too old to matter. I watched them walk through the doors of that small brick building with the same hesitation I once saw in my own eyes, a fear of being forgotten. We turned an abandoned library into our headquarters. The walls still smelled faintly of dust and paper dreams. Daniel oversaw the logistics, permits, sponsors, outreach. I handled the human part, sitting with people, listening to what the world had taken from them, and showing them how to get it back. One morning, a man named Robert came in. He was 72, a former machinist, hands gnarled from years of labor. "They said I'm obsolete," he told me, "said I can't work the new machines." I smiled. "Maybe you don't need to. Maybe you teach the ones who can." He stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly. The following week, he was teaching apprentices. His eyes found light again. That's what the foundation became, a place where broken pride went to be mended. Daniel and I worked side by side most days, but sometimes he'd catch me lost in thought and ask, "You still thinking about Boston?" "Sometimes," I'd admit, "but not about revenge anymore. About how easy it is for people to lose themselves chasing admiration." He smiled softly. "You think I've found myself yet? You're closer than most men ever get." He didn't argue. In June, we were invited to a local university to give a talk about integrity and resilience. I stood at the podium, staring out at the rows of young faces, students who thought success was a matter of volume, not value. I began simply, "I was once a teacher, and I thought knowledge was enough. But then I learned that the hardest lesson in life is remembering your worth when others decide it for you." The auditorium fell silent. Even Daniel, sitting in the front row, looked at me as if seeing me for the first time again. Afterward, a student asked, "Mr. Callahan, do you ever regret exposing them?" I thought about that for a long second. "No," I said finally, "because pretending ignorance would have been worse than their lies." Applause followed, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, taking its first real breath. That night, we drove home in silence, the road stretching like a ribbon of memory between the mountains. Halfway back, Daniel said quietly, "Dad, I think Mom would have liked this life." "She would have," I said. "She always wanted me to teach until my hands couldn't write anymore." "And now you're teaching again," he said, smiling. The truth was, I could almost feel her in that moment. The way the wind pressed through the car windows felt like her hand resting on mine. By late autumn, Asheville began preparing for the Harvest Fair, a small-town event that drew everyone to the square. The mayor called one afternoon and asked if the foundation wanted to participate. Daniel suggested a booth showcasing people we'd helped. I agreed. When the day arrived, the sun poured gold over the town. Our banner read, "Age is not an expiration date." People came by to listen, to share stories, to thank us. Some brought pies, others tears. An elderly woman hugged Daniel and whispered, "Your father's story saved my husband's life." Later that afternoon, the mayor called us to the stage. "For reminding us what community truly means," he said, "we present the Callahan Foundation with the City Service Medal." The crowd cheered. I looked at Daniel, and for the first time in years, he didn't look like a man trying to belong. He already did. After the ceremony, he leaned close and said, "You know what's funny? A year ago, I thought this would embarrass me. And now," he said, "it's the proudest thing I've ever done." The applause faded into music and laughter. Children danced. The air smelled of roasted apples and wood smoke. I stood under the same sky that had watched me through humiliation, solitude, and redemption, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was standing under it alone. As the evening settled, Daniel turned to me. "Dad, there's something I've been meaning to ask." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." He laughed. "No, serious. I've been thinking about buying some land near here, starting a home, a family. I want my kids to know their grandfather." The word grandfather carried through me like a bell. I swallowed hard. "I'd like that," I said, "but make sure they plant roses." He smiled. "Of course." The fair lights glimmered against the night. I realized then that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or headlines. It comes quietly, wearing calloused hands and forgiveness. When we drove home, the porch light was already glowing. The roses caught the last of the sunset, their petals shining like embers. I thought of Margaret again. Her laughter, her kindness, the way she believed that life always finds its way back to grace. And I finally understood what she meant when she said, "We don't live to be remembered. We live so we can remember ourselves." The world had tried to strip me bare, but it had also given me something in return. A clearer view of what matters when the noise fades. I walked up the steps, the boards creaking softly beneath my feet. Daniel lingered behind me, looking out over the hills, the town, and the quiet future we'd somehow rebuilt. Maybe peace doesn't need to be earned after all. Maybe it just waits for you to stop running from it. Winter came slower that year. The cold rolled down from the mountains like an old song, steady and familiar. By December, frost clung to the edges of the porch railing, and the roses slept under a thin veil of ice. I'd cover them every evening, whispering to them the way Margaret used to. "Rest easy. The sun's just sleeping too." Daniel was living close by now, 5 miles down the road near the river. He came over often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit. There was a steadiness in him I hadn't seen since he was a boy. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something quieter. Humility has its own gravity. It pulls people back to where they belong. One evening he showed up unannounced, cheeks red from the cold. "Dad," he said, holding a letter, "you've been invited to the annual Business Integrity Awards. They want you to give the keynote speech." I laughed. "Integrity has an award now?" He smiled. "I think they're trying to make it fashionable again." I took the letter, read it twice, then set it aside. "I'll go," I said finally, "but not to be praised. I'll go to remind them what it costs." The ceremony was held in Boston. Same city, same streets that once humiliated me. The venue was different this time, though. A glass hall overlooking the Charles River. The skyline shimmered like a confession. I arrived wearing a simple navy suit, the same pair of shoes I'd fixed myself years ago. Daniel came with me, his hand on my shoulder when we entered the hall. As soon as I walked in, whispers started. Not cruel ones this time, just curious. Some people recognized me from the headlines. Others just felt the energy shift. like the room suddenly remembered what it meant to be accountable. When my name was called, applause filled the hall. I walked to the stage slowly, each step echoing with the weight of all that came before. The host handed me the microphone, smiling nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "the man who taught us that integrity doesn't retire, Mr. Thomas Callahan." I looked at the audience, men in suits, women in glittering gowns, a sea of people who spent their lives chasing numbers, and yet, for a moment, they were still, waiting. "I don't have a speech," I began. "I have a story." A murmur rippled through the room, but I went on. "A year ago, I was sitting at a table just like this, surrounded by people who smiled while measuring my worth. They offered me charity disguised as kindness and silence disguised as respect. I let them think I was small, because sometimes, to test the size of a man's heart, you have to shrink yourself and watch how he behaves." The room was quiet. Even the waiters paused. I learned that night that money can polish cruelty until it shines, that arrogance can wear a tuxedo and call itself refinement. But I also learned that truth doesn't need to raise its voice, it just needs time to arrive. I could see Daniel in the crowd, his eyes bright, proud. "Some of you," I continued, "might believe dignity is a luxury, that it belongs to those who can afford to walk away. But I'm here to tell you, it's the only thing you can't buy, and the last thing you should ever sell." A silence settled so deep, I could hear the lights hum. Then I said softer, "If you've ever made someone feel small for being honest, I hope you think about what that cost you, because no profit will ever fill that kind of loss." When I finished, I stepped back from the microphone. No applause came at first, just stillness. Then slowly, people began to stand. One by one, the sound rose. Not wild, not loud, just genuine. The kind that carries weight instead of noise. Afterward, a woman approached me, mid-40s, sharp eyes, voice steady. "Mr. Callahan," she said, "I was one of the attorneys representing the Ellis family during the trial. I wanted to thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not letting me forget what side I was on." She handed me a small envelope and left before I could respond. Inside was a note. "Truth is contagious. Thank you for starting the outbreak." That night, Daniel and I walked by the river. Boston looked softer now, stripped of its arrogance. "You did it," he said. "You changed how people see integrity." I shook my head. "No, I reminded them what it looks like." The water shimmered under the bridge lights. For a moment I saw my reflection beside his. Two men, father and son, weathered by the same storms, but standing steady at last. The air smelled of salt and snow. I said, "The last time I stood in this city, I walked away ashamed. Tonight, I'm leaving grateful." "For what?" he asked. "For surviving it." We drove home through the night, the highway quiet and endless. Somewhere between the mountains and the stars, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't something you give others. It's something you let yourself have, so the road doesn't end too soon. When we reached Asheville, the porch light was still on. Always was. I stepped out of the car, breathing the cold mountain air. Daniel carried the award inside, set it on the mantel beside Margaret's picture. It glowed softly under the lamp. "Mom would have been proud," he said. "She already is," I replied. The house was warm. The roses outside, even beneath the frost, were still alive. They always found a way to bloom again, just slower, quieter, stronger. Life has a way of circling back to where it began, but never quite the same. A year after that night in Boston, I found myself sitting once again on my porch in Asheville, watching the world turn gold with autumn. The air smelled of pine and rain, the kind of scent that makes time slow down. My house, this small wooden place with its creaking floors and stubborn soul, had seen everything. It had held grief, silence, humiliation, and now something close to peace. Daniel arrived around sunset, as he often did. He carried a small box in his hands and a strange mix of nerves and excitement in his eyes. "What's that?" I asked. He grinned. "Something for you, from everyone at the foundation." He handed it over. Inside was a plaque, simple wood with clean letters. Thomas E. Callahan, proof that integrity ages well. I laughed. "You all have too much time on your hands." He shook his head. "We just wanted to say thank you for not giving up when it would have been easier." I looked at him for a long time, realizing he wasn't talking just about the scandal. He meant everything. The years of distance, the mistakes, the silence. "You made it worth not giving up," I said. He smiled, but there was something else behind it, something unspoken. "Dad," he said finally, "I've been thinking, I want you to be part of the wedding." I blinked. "Wedding?" He nodded, almost shy. "Her name's Grace. She runs our volunteer program. She's the reason I remember how to breathe." I let the words settle between us. Then I chuckled softly. "Grace, huh? Sounds like the universe is trying to be poetic." He laughed. "She wants to have the ceremony here in the garden." My throat tightened. "Here, among Mom's roses." The way he said it, "Mom's roses," made my eyes sting. "She'd like that," I whispered. We spent the following weeks preparing the garden. We fixed the old arch Margaret had built, painted it white again, and trimmed every bush until the air smelled like memory. On the morning of the wedding, sunlight filtered through the trees, catching the dew on the petals. The chairs were simple, wooden, arranged in neat rows facing the garden gate. Nothing extravagant, just honest. As guests began to arrive, I noticed something strange. Faces from every chapter of my life. Old students, former colleagues, neighbors who once whispered. Even Julian was there, smiling quietly from the back row. Life, it seemed, had a sense of symmetry. When Grace appeared, she wore a small rose pinned to her hair. Daniel stood under the arch, his hands shaking just enough to remind me he was still my boy. The ceremony was short, but it carried more truth than any speech I'd ever heard. When it ended, the guests drifted toward the porch, laughter rising with the light breeze. Daniel walked over, holding Grace's hand, and said, "Dad, there's one more thing." He turned to the crowd and raised his glass. "Everyone here knows what my father went through. You know the story. But what you might not know is that he taught me something no classroom ever could, that dignity doesn't retire and love doesn't expire. So tonight, before we celebrate us, I want to celebrate him." The crowd clapped, soft at first, then louder. My heart pounded like it did when I used to stand in front of a class full of students, waiting to see if the lesson would land. I stood, nodded once, and said, "You don't need to celebrate me, son. Just keep living in a way that honors the truth. That's all the applause I'll ever need." He hugged me then, tight, real, full of years we both wished we could redo. "I love you, Dad." "I know," I said. "I've always known." The night settled gently after that. Lanterns flickered, music floated through the air, and the roses swayed like they were keeping rhythm. At one point, I stepped away from the crowd, out by the edge of the yard where the moonlight touched the garden. The air was cool, the sky clear. I could almost feel Margaret's hand slip into mine. "You'd like her," I whispered. "She laughs the way you used to." The wind rustled through the leaves, soft and approving. I stayed there a while, letting the sounds of the wedding fade into the distance. The laughter, the toasts, the clinking glasses, they all blurred into something warm and distant. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I was exactly where I was meant to be. Before I went back inside, I looked up at the stars and said quietly, "You were right, Margaret. Sometimes life saves its best chapter for the end." Now every morning feels lighter. The foundation continues to grow. Daniel and Grace visit every week, bringing food, laughter, and new stories. There's talk of a baby on the way, though they haven't told me officially yet. I can tell by the way Grace glows when she sits in the garden. I still wake early, still make 2 cups of coffee. One black, one with cream. The second one cools beside me while I sit in the porch chair and watch the sun climb through the mist. Sometimes I think I see a shadow beside me. Sometimes I even talk to it. The world calls me many things now, teacher, hero, survivor, but I think Margaret would just call me what she always did, her stubborn old fool who finally learned how to bloom again. And maybe that's all I ever needed to be. It's funny how life quiets down when it finally makes sense. The house doesn't feel lonely anymore, just peaceful. The mornings still come early, the coffee still brews the same, and the roses still open right on time. But now there's laughter in the background, Grace humming in the kitchen, Daniel's footsteps on the porch, little Margaret's giggles echoing through the yard. Sometimes, when the sun starts to rise, I look out at the mist over the hills and think of all the versions of myself I had to bury to become this one. The angry man, the proud man, the man who mistook silence for weakness. They all had their purpose, but they're gone now, replaced by someone quieter, steadier, more grateful. Yesterday, I took Margaret by the hand and showed her how to prune the roses. She asked, "Grandpa, why do you cut the flowers if you love them?" I smiled. "Because that's how they grow back stronger." She thought for a moment, then nodded, as if she understood. Maybe one day she'll realize that lesson was never about roses. Before I went to bed last night, I stepped onto the porch one more time. The air was cool, still carrying the faint perfume of the garden. I looked at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Margaret, all of us." And for a moment, I swear the wind answered back. Maybe that's what peace really is. Not silence, but the soft voice of everything that tried to break you, finally admitting it never could.